Aitah for sending my son to his dad's house even though he doesn't want to. Mom, please don't make me go, my son, Ethan said, his voice cracking as he clutched my arm. He was 16, tall for his age, with his father's sharp jawline and my stubborn eyes. But right now, his expression wasn't prideful or defiant. It was raw, almost fearful. I know you don't want to, I whispered, kneeling to meet his gaze. But Grandma isn't getting any younger. I promised I'd visit her this week, and I need you to stay with your dad. He flinched like my words had burned him. Mom, he said, almost shaking, I hate him. I don't want to see him. He ruined everything. I closed my eyes, feeling the ache in my chest. His father, Mark, my ex-husband, had been gone from our lives for years in every meaningful sense. He had cheated on me while I was pregnant with Ethan, lied, manipulated, and tried to control everything I did, even after we divorced. He tried to guilt me into letting him see Ethan, and Ethan had resisted every time. But this week, I was going to visit my 79-year-old mother, who had just suffered a minor stroke and wanted to see me. I couldn't leave Ethan alone. I didn't have anyone else to take care of him. And yes, Mark was legally required to have visitation rights. Ethan's eyes welled up. Why can't you just stay with me instead? Why do I have to go back to him? I bit my lip, fighting the frustration that bubbled inside me. I had been through countless fights with Mark, countless nights explaining to my son why his father couldn't be trusted, and now suddenly I was supposed to hand Ethan over for a whole week to the man who had caused so much pain, whose words had always been a weapon against me. In not saying you have to like him, I said softly, you just have to stay there for a week. I'll make sure he behaves, and we'll call every day, okay? Ethan's jaw tightened. Mom, what if he hurts me again? I froze. My heart skipped. It wasn't that Mark was physically violent, but emotionally. He knew exactly which words would cut the deepest, which insecurities to target. My son had been through his verbal storms before, and though he had grown stronger, 16 is still too young to bear that kind of psychological weight alone. I'll make sure he doesn't, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. But you have to go, Ethan. Grandma needs me, and I need you safe. He looked away, torn between fear and duty. He finally nodded, a tiny, reluctant gesture that felt like betrayal. But not to me, to himself. Packing for Mark's house felt surreal. Ethan stuffed his things into a backpack, his hands trembling slightly as if the bag itself could shield him from the past. I drove us to Mark's neighborhood, a place that had always smelled faintly of cheap cologne and regret, and parked outside the house. Mark opened the door before I could knock, 55, graying at the temples, still carrying that smug charm that had once drawn me in, before it had turned into a weapon. Ethan, Mark said brightly, like nothing had happened. Come on in, buddy. Ethan's shoulders stiffened. He didn't move. Mark turned to me, his smile faltering slightly. Is everything okay? I swallowed my anger. He's fine. He just needs to remember why he's here. Mark nodded, his eyes lingering on Ethan a moment too long. I knew that look, the one that said, I still think I know what's best for him. Mom, Ethan whispered as I knelt down one last time, what if he tries to make me like him again? What if he tries to control me? My hands tightened around his shoulders. Then you'll tell me. I'll fight for you. Always. But I need you to go. For Grandma, for me, and for you too. He swallowed hard, and I could see the storm inside him. Anger, fear, betrayal, and something else. The faintest glimmer of defiance. The same defiance that had kept him safe all these years. I'll call every day, I said. We'll talk, we'll text. You won't be alone. He nodded again, slower this time, more deliberate. Then, finally, he stepped toward the door. Mark reached for him, but Ethan stepped back slightly, eyes narrowing. Don't touch me, he said softly. Mark blinked, a flicker of something, surprise, disappointment, crossing his face. He recovered quickly. All right. Well, do it your way, champ. And with that, Ethan stepped inside. I waited in the car, heart pounding, watching through the window as my son faced the man who had haunted his life from birth. I wanted to scream at Mark, tell him to behave, tell him not to hurt Ethan. But I couldn't. I had to trust that my son's strength, the very thing that had made him survive his father's manipulations, would carry him through. As I drove away toward my mother's house, a pit of dread settled in my stomach. I was doing the right thing. I knew I was. But right now, in this moment, it felt like sending my heart into someone else's hands. Because sometimes betrayal isn't about what has already happened. Sometimes it's about the fear of what might happen. And I had no choice but to hope Ethan's resilience would be stronger than Mark's lingering control. Part 2. A week in the shadow of his father. Ethan's first night at Mark's house was the hardest. He refused to unpack, leaving his backpack by the corner of the bed, staring at the floor like it could protect him from what was coming. Mark tried to make conversation, cheerful at first, asking about school, friends, hobbies, but every question felt like a test, like he was seeing how much control he still had over a 16-year-old who had spent his whole life learning to protect himself from men like this. "I made your favorite," Mark said, holding up a plate of spaghetti. "Thought we could have dinner together." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I don't want dinner with you." Mark froze. For a moment, I imagined he was actually startled. Maybe he didn't realize my son had grown immune to his charm. Then he smiled, that predatory smile that had once convinced me to overlook everything he had done. "You'll eat. You always eat." Ethan didn't move. Mark's hand hovered over the plate, indecisive. That's when it hit me. My son's silence, his refusal to engage, was the strongest defense he could have, and Mark, despite all his experience, had no clue how to break it. By the second date, Mark had started using tactics he thought would make Ethan bend. He tried guilt. "Your mom said you'd like this," he said, holding up a comic book. "Don't you want to make me happy?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I don't care about what you want." Then he tried flattery. "You're smarter than I ever was at your age. I can see it in your eyes. Don't you want to talk to someone who understands?" Ethan's reply was simple, calm, but devastating in its weight. "I don't need you to understand me. I need you to respect me." Mark's eyes flickered. He had never been challenged like this before. Midweek brought a new type of confrontation. Mark invited Ethan to go fishing, one of the few activities they had shared when Ethan was younger, before all the lies and betrayal. Ethan reluctantly agreed, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. On the boat, Mark tried the old manipulation, reminiscing about the good times, telling Ethan he was proud of him, hinting that life with me had made him too serious, too rigid. Ethan didn't respond at first. Then, finally, he said, "Do you know why I don't want to be here?" Mark leaned closer, smirk curling his lips. "Come on, tell me. You'll feel better." "I don't want to be here because of you," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Because of the lies, the secrets, the way you treated Mom. Because you think love means control. And I refuse to let you do that to me." The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to press the water down, flatten the ripples of the lake. Mark's face darkened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of fear in his father's eyes. Fear that his words might not be enough to manipulate this boy, that his authority had limits. By the fourth day, tension escalated further. Mark began questioning Ethan about me, asking whether I was strict, whether I had told him lies about me. He tried to make Ethan doubt me, subtly planting seeds of suspicion. But Ethan, more mature than his years, had anticipated this. He calmly responded, "Mom tells the truth. You've never been able to do that." Mark's frustration became almost visible, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. Ethan had stripped away the power he had once wielded effortlessly. The fifth night brought the hardest challenge. Ethan woke up to find Mark sitting in the living room, staring at old photo albums. He motioned for Ethan to join him. Reluctantly, my son sat down, hands in his lap, eyes wary. Mark opened a photo of us, Ethan as a toddler, me smiling, oblivious to the betrayals that would come. "You were such a happy kid," he said softly. "Do you remember this?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I remember that you weren't around when I needed you most." Mark's face twitched. His usual composure faltered. "I made mistakes," he said quietly, "but I'm still your father." "You have to know," Ethan interrupted firmly. "I have a father, yes, but you are not him, not the man I need, not the man I respect." It was quiet then, the kind of silence that feels like a verdict being delivered. Mark closed the album slowly, a storm behind his eyes. By the end of the week, something remarkable happened. Ethan had survived the week unbroken. He had faced his father's manipulation, his verbal power, his attempts to undermine him, and had stood firm every time. He called me each night, voice tense yet proud. On the last day, as I arrived to pick him up, Ethan walked out holding his backpack. His posture was straight, his gaze steady. He didn't run into my arms immediately. Instead, he looked at Mark and said, "I learned a lot this week. About you. About me. And I won't forget either." Mark opened his mouth and Ethan ignored him. He stepped into my car and closed the door, shutting out the past but carrying the lessons he had survived. Driving away, I reached over and held his hand. "You did amazing," I said. Ethan's lips curved slightly, a small smile of quiet triumph. "I survived," he said. "I'm stronger than him, and I know I can handle anything now." I knew he was right. He wasn't just my son. He was a force of resilience, shaped by betrayal but unbroken. And maybe, just maybe, that week had shown both of us something I hadn't realized before. Sometimes, survival is its own kind of victory, and some betrayals, no matter how close to home, cannot take that away. Part 3. The final confrontation. It had been 3 days since we returned from Mark's house. Ethan had slipped back into our routine as if nothing had happened. School, homework, dinners, late-night talks, but I knew better. He carried that week like armor, a layer of caution wrapped around his 16-year-old heart, and I knew Mark wasn't done. The first sign came with a call. Mark's number flashed on my phone and my stomach dropped. "I just wanted to talk to Ethan," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "He needs to understand why I acted the way I did." I paused. I could feel my son behind me, hearing the faint tremor in my hands. "No," I said firmly. "He doesn't need to understand anything from you. He needs peace. And you gave him enough lessons already." There was a long silence. Then, almost softly, "Has still my son." "Yes," I said, voice shaking slightly, "but has also his own person, and you don't get to control that anymore." The next day, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, it was a single page, typewritten, cold, detached, yet laced with menace. "Ethan, you think you're stronger than me. You think you've won. But people like you don't just survive. They falter when the world tests them. I'll see you soon." Ethan held it in his hands like it burned him. I wanted to tear it up, throw it away, and pretend it never existed. But I knew better. This was a test, the final psychological push to see if he could break my son. That evening, we sat together in his room. "Mom," Ethan said quietly, "has not going to stop. Has going to try again in person or through messages or by making people doubt me." I nodded, swallowing the fear that gripped me. "Then we face it together. But you have to promise me, no matter what he does, you stay true to yourself. No lies, no manipulation. You're stronger than him, Ethan. Don't forget that." He looked at me, eyes glinting with determination I hadn't seen before. "I know. I'm not afraid of him anymore." 2 days later, the final confrontation happened. Mark showed up at our door unannounced. I froze, but Ethan stepped forward before I could react. "I told you not to come," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Mark looked at me, then at Ethan. "I just want one conversation, face to face. No secrets, no accusations." Ethan's posture stiffened, but he didn't back down. "I've already had that conversation. It ended a week ago." Mark's eyes flickered, almost a flash of anger, then sadness. "You don't understand. I had reasons. I made mistakes. But I still love you." Ethan's voice was steady, strong, and final. "Love doesn't give you the right to hurt people. It doesn't mean control, lies, or fear. You've had your chance. I won't give you another." Mark's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm 16, Ethan said, voice low but sharp, "and I'm done being your project, your experiment, your failure, and not your son to control. In my own person." The weight in Mark's face shifted. Shock, disbelief, maybe even respect. And then he left. No shouting, no pleading, just a quiet retreat that echoed louder than any argument could. That night, I tucked Ethan into bed. "You did it," I whispered. "You stood up to him. I'm proud of you." He smiled faintly, exhausted but triumphant. "I learned from you, from everything you taught me about standing up for myself. As part of our past, not our future." I hugged him close, feeling his strength, his resilience, the unbreakable bond we had built over years of betrayal, lies, and fear. A week later, the final proof of victory came. A voicemail. Mark's voice, calm, almost apologetic. Ethan, I understand now. I can't control you, and I won't try. Maybe someday you'll forgive me, but until then, I'll leave you alone. Ethan listened quietly, then deleted the message. No anger, no tears, only the quiet and unshakable knowledge that he had won. Not because he hurt his father, but because he survived the storm unbroken. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Some betrayals don't destroy us. Some teach us. Some show us who we really are. And in Ethan's case, who he was always meant to become: strong, wise, and yielding. And maybe that's the only revenge worth having, the triumph of surviving, the courage to never let the past dictate your life.